like if you want to work in politics or government, the most important thing is that you can enjoy and appreciate people and the human condition, right? And you have to be able to laugh at the kind of ridiculousness of all of us, yourself, maybe most importantly. One of the best experiences I had, probably for everyone, the first campaign is the one that you remember the most. And in that first campaign in 2019, I knocked on 15,000 doors. I will go to my grave. I am a 7-Eleven coffee guy.
All right. Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Capitol Spotlight. Today we are here with James Walkinshaw, hoping to be the next congressman from Virginia's 11th Congressional District, former staffer, now working in local politics. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you. Very excited to be here.
Absolutely. So
I'm going Jim Jordan style with
yes,
my
jacket off. We always appreciate it. Even though it's a nice mild day for once, DC summer's not happening.
Right.
But thank you for being here. Quickly, could you just give everyone a little background, like where are you from? Like how'd you get to the Hill?
Sure. So I'm James Walkinshaw. I'm a lifelong Northern Virginian. I was born in Northern Virginia. My grandfather grew up on a farm near Dulles Airport.
Cool.
It's not there anymore, so don't go out and try to look for it. I went to school at New York University, moved home after I graduated. I think like a lot of people, I was kind of trying to figure out, what do I want to do? Do I want to go to law school, or how do I, decide what to do with my life? And I kind of got involved in Democratic politics in Northern Virginia. At that time, I kind of felt like, the direction that the people who represented my community were going wasn't something that I thought was right for our community, not consistent with my values. So I kind of jumped in and, got involved. One thing led to another. Eventually started working for Gerry Connolly.
Cool. Good stuff. And so how long were you a staffer on the Hill?
So I was Gerry Connolly's chief of staff. So I started working for him in 2007 when he was chairman of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors.
Wow. Gotcha.
And he ran for Congress in 2008. I managed that campaign for Congress in 2008, and then I became his chief of staff in 2009.
Cool.
So I was there from
when he took office.
Yeah, that's right. When he took office in 2009, and I left the day before I was sworn into the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors in 2020. So,
nice, following in his path. So
yeah, that's right.
We'll take a step back before we get too much into like what you're up to these days. Love to hear a little bit about your background,
Sure.
growing up in a farm area around here. I think a lot of us would really appreciate that separation from the chaos of DC. So what was it like growing up in that environment?
Yeah, so my grandfather grew up on the farm.
Okay, my bad.
I grew up a little bit in Fairfax in the early years. I spent most of my childhood in western Prince William County near Haymarket and Gainesville. It's kind of like if you're in DC and just like you get on 66 and keep going.
Cool.
Eventually you get there. And it was a kind of a rural area at the time, not so much anymore, but working class family. My mom was a nurse, a home healthcare worker, we would say today. My dad was a plumber. Cool. So, I spent all of my childhood weekends and vacations from school working on construction sites alongside him. So, we had just kind of a working class but middle class kind of upbringing and lifestyle, which was possible in Northern Virginia at that time. Yeah. A lot harder for folks to do today.
Sure, absolutely. How have you kind of seen the transformation of DC over the past few decades? Like, what was it like when you were younger to today?
Yeah, my recollection of DC when I was a kid, like a suburban kid, and maybe I was like a lot of folks who grow up in the DC area where it's like I probably didn't fully take advantage of, the things that DC had to offer. But, we did the obligatory museum trips, and my dad and I would go to a Capitals game or Wizards game every once in a while, but like most of my life, the center of my life was always kind of Northern Virginia suburbs.
Nice. So when you start to work for Connolly as campaign manager, That was a red seat before that, correct? The member was retiring.
Yeah.
And so you're trying to flip that seat. What was that like being on a campaign? And I assume to be a pretty close election where you have to kind of figure it out and go all for it. So how did that work out?
Yeah, so the 11th District of Virginia was created in 1990, and it was represented by Democrat Leslie Byrne. She lost to Republican Tom Davis in 1994, and Tom Davis held the seat from 1994 to 2008.
Gotcha.
Kind of a moderate Republican, the kind that existed in that era, not dissimilar from Connie Morella, also a moderate Republican who represented Maryland suburbs. And Tom Davis decided not to seek re-election. I think he, becoming increasingly a tense relationship between him and kind of the right flank of the Republican Party at the time. Connolly was the county-wide elected chairman of the Board of Supervisors. So he represented more than 1 million people across Fairfax County, bigger than Congressional district, so it had high name ID.
For sure.
Had, crossover appeal. There were Republicans in the county at the time who, voted for him and supported him because they thought he did a good job leading the county. So we were in a strong position in 2008, which was also kind of a wave Democratic year, right?
Sure.
The backlash to the Bush administration and the war in Iraq, especially, really propelled
riding
Democrats.
in with President Obama, I'm sure.
Yeah,
helps
that's
everything.
right. Yeah, so 2008, and we did have a Democratic primary against that former Congresswoman Leslie Byrne at the time, but we won both the primary and the general election by fairly wide margins. However, we faced a real challenge in 2010, right? So you have that 2008 election, a lot of new Democrats come into Congress, Barack Obama elected. We kind of felt we had, endless possibilities in terms of what we could accomplish and the things that we could change. And we did, do a lot of positive things, in my view, the Affordable Care Act being the biggest. But there's no question there was, a backlash in that 2010 election, kind of the beginning of the Tea Party wave. And that election was a real battle for us. We were outspent by our Republican opponent who had run previously in 2008. Kind of all the energy was on the Republican side, and we narrowly won by 981 votes. So, we had to really pull out all the stops and push really hard to make that happen. And a lot of Democrats did not survive that wave year, but we were able to hold on, and his re-elections were easier, and the trend lines in Northern Virginia obviously became more and more Democratic over time.
I feel like that was always a fun thing as a staffer on election night, to kind of watch your friends and make sure they still have jobs, and then there's always that one race where, like, I had a friend who was working for Marionette Miller Meeks. And so it was like that election where she won by, I don't know, 100 votes or whatever it was. And you're just like stressing for them.
Yeah.
So you were one of those people where everyone's looking out for you that time.
Yeah. And you have a little bit of survivor's guilt in that kind of situation,
for sure.
right? Because, a lot of folks that we had worked with, including in the Virginia delegation, Tom Perriello lost that year in the 5th District, Glenn Nye, Rick Boucher, who had been kind of an institution in Western and Southwest Virginia, lost. So it was a lot of friends who didn't make it through. Yeah.
So when it comes to running a campaign, a lot of staffers think, hey, like, let's switch it up. Let's get out of DC for a little bit. Let's go work on a campaign. Could be a great opportunity to kind of skip a few steps on the hill. What are some things that staffers should expect when working on a campaign?
Well, and one, I always encouraged folks, on our staff and other staffers that I would talk to and meet with, to have some campaign experience, because one, you want to understand how these 535 people actually got here to Congress, and you can get a feel for, how do real voters interpret or pay attention to or not pay attention to what's taking place here in Washington, right?
For sure.
Because sometimes some of the, battles that we think here might be the most important thing ever, right? The vote on a rule, and the, omnibus whatever bill that feels like the most important issue. If you're back home in the district in a campaign, you can realize actually no one even knows what the heck you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I think it's valuable to have that experience to understand, the things that happen in Washington that impact people and that, drive their decisions in terms of how they vote, and the things that don't. In terms of what you should expect, a campaign is like a startup that starts and exists maybe for only a few months, right? And even a startup that's going to exist for a long time is chaotic. So a campaign is going to kind of take that chaos to the next level. And it's also, the kind of atmosphere where everyone needs to, and you can really succeed if you're willing to just do whatever needs to be done,
right?
Sure. I mean, folks who, when I was managing Connolly's first campaign for Congress in 2008, there's some folks who, work with us still today who remember me like cleaning the bathrooms in the campaign office. Because whatever needs to be done, it's like you have to do it. But I think it's a great opportunity for folks to experience it.
Absolutely. I always think of Congress as a version of startups. Maybe the Senate's more corporations, the House are more startups,
right?
But
individual offices.
Because you have 435 unique operating offices where there's really not a lot of general oversight that keeps things similar. And so you have like such an important job as a chief of staff and then as a member to set the culture of that office. And so being a former staffer, already being on the Hill before, being on a campaign, how do you feel like that sets you up well to come into Congress, hopefully, and create a culture that's going to be very successful here?
Yeah. Well, I think it makes me well prepared. I also will have, presumably if I'm successful, kind of the advantage that I think a lot of folks in Congressman Connolly's office will stay on, so I won't need to kind of create or recreate the office from scratch.
For sure.
But it definitely gives me an insight into, how do you ensure on a day-to-day basis that the office is being responsive to constituents, right? How do you make the hiring decisions to kind of complete each piece of the puzzle to make sure that, your legislative team, your communications team, your constituent service team, your outreach team are all functioning at a high level?
For sure.
And how do you maintain those standards? I think it gives me some insights into how as a member, and staff play an important role in this, how do you prioritize your time, the issues you get involved in and engaged in. A lot of new members, I saw this over the course of my career, a lot of new members come to Washington and it's like, limitless opportunities.
Sure.
There's so many things. The world is your oyster and you can you try to do everything and go to everything. And if you try to do everything, you end up kind of doing nothing. So I have some experience in terms of how do you navigate that? How can you focus yourself and prioritize yourself in the office so that you can actually make an impact on things?
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us a little bit more about your time as a staffer. You were there for quite a while. What was it like getting onboarded as a chief of staff, coming from the campaign? I assume you didn't work on the Hill before that at all, right?
I didn't, yeah. So I was 26 years old, and definitely, I owe a great debt to Gerry Connolly for a lot of reasons, but one is he took a chance on me.
Yeah, for sure.
The conventional wisdom, and probably a lot of times this wisdom is right, is, don't hire your 26-year-old campaign manager as chief of staff who doesn't have experience in Washington.
Fair enough.
That's probably good advice in most cases, but he saw something in me that I would be able to do it. And the first year, especially that moment we were in, I mean, you have to go back to 2009. We were in a deep recession.
Yeah.
The war in Iraq was raging. There was huge enthusiasm from the Democratic base to solve everything immediately. So it was a very challenging time, exciting time, but challenging time. And, it's drinking from a fire hose in terms of, getting the office set up, getting the especially constituent mail responses and systems set up, and the technology at that time, wasn't as advanced as it is today. We went through the kind of, town hall challenges of hosting town halls and, getting shouted down and heckled, and the Tea Party was on the rise at that time. So we were facing that. So big challenges, but for me, it's one of those moments in life that kind of always remember, maybe because it was so intense, and definitely learned a lot and grew a lot through that.
So that's usually that 1 to 2 year mark, especially for a campaign manager that comes onto the Hill as chief. That's usually the falling out point, right, between a member and a chief, and say, okay, I'm going to get a more institutional guy at this point.
Yeah.
And so how did you work through those challenges with Congressman Connolly to figure out how to work together and create such a sustainable relationship over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think we always worked pretty well together, and maybe our personalities complemented each other a little bit, and folks who knew him could probably speak to that, but he was a big personality that kind of filled any room that he was into, and accomplished a lot through force of will and incredible intellect. And I was kind of the planner and the organizer to make things happen behind the scenes and accomplish what he wanted to accomplish. So I think our relationship worked well, and he just made it a lot of fun too. And one of the things I always tell people, if you want to work in politics or government, the most important thing is that you can enjoy and appreciate people and the human condition, right? And you have to be able to laugh at the kind of ridiculousness of all of us, yourself maybe most importantly, right? Because in these jobs, you get exposed to kind of every kind of person and people kind of in all the different moments in their lives. A lot of times, when they're angry or are frustrated, and you have to be able to kind of appreciate all of that. Last night was National Night Out, which is kind of a big national event where neighborhoods have block parties, and local police department.
Missed out. Jeez.
Yeah, you could have come. Local police department comes and builds partnerships between communities and public safety agencies. So I was visiting all the different neighborhoods in the district that I represent, and it's like you get to hear it all from people, right? Like I show up at the neighborhood block party, and some people are thrilled, and some people want to give me an earful about the storm sewer that's busted or their taxes, and you kind of have to just enjoy and appreciate all of that, and Gerry was really good about that and making that enjoyable and fun for everybody.
Absolutely. One of the challenges, we had an event called Climbing the Hill a while back where Alex Shriver, who was a former GOP chief who had a very similar come up to you at a similar age, where it's like you're in your mid-20s at a time where there were really no other chief of staffs or in that age range. How did that affect you building relationships or kind of feeling like imposter syndrome, out of place? What did it feel like?
Well, I don't know that records are kept, but I was 26 at the time, and I might have been the youngest, or maybe there was one or two others. There were a lot of more experienced chiefs of staff who were great in terms of mentoring me and helping me.
Nice.
In the Virginia delegation, especially at that time, and to some extent, still today, we had a great, kind of bipartisan relationship among the chiefs, and some of those folks, Dan Scanling, who was Frank Wolf's chief of staff at the time, was just really thoughtful and kind in terms of helping me and talking me through things, and he and I are friends to this day. So that's the great thing about the Hill, especially as a staffer. It's like people are willing to help you, and if you can find those right people who can really help. When I started, I was the youngest chief of staff in the Virginia delegation.
Nice.
But that's one of the problems with, hanging your hat on being the youngest. By the time I left, I was on the older end of it, and people were like, "Wow, this guy's still here hanging around." So everything like comes full circle at some point.
Yeah, for sure. So before we get into like what you did after your time as a staffer, tell us a little bit about your family. When did you meet your wife in this process?
So my wife and I met actually in 2010.
Nice.
Kind of right as I was in the middle of that very intense re-election campaign for Connolly, and I think she still tells the stories of like me having red, bloodshot, sleep deprived eyes for most of that year. But we met then. We were married in 2015,
Cool.
So we're celebrating our 10-year anniversary this
Congratulations.
December.
Good
So I
stuff.
just have to make sure there isn't like a government funding crisis or anything in
Bound to be.
late December
Yeah.
mess up my anniversary plans. But looking forward to that. And we have a son, Mateo, who will be 5 in September coming up. So he's
Nice.
He's a wild little guy, but a lot of fun.
So if he's 5 years old, that was probably right around the time where you left the Hill.
Yeah, so he was born September 30th of 2020. I was sworn into the Board of Supervisors in January of 2020. Okay. And actually, I have missed one meeting of the Board of Supervisors in 5 years.
All right.
And it was the day he was born. Actually,
Very
my
cool.
wife went into labor on the day that our board met. Turns out he wasn't born until the next day, but I missed that meeting.
I think that's fair. So how was it like in this transition period? So I have a 5-month-old at home.
Oh, congratulations.
So, thank you. And so it's chaos, right? Like how do you figure out how to recenter your life around this precious thing, but also stay true to your commitments? And obviously you have a lot going on at that time, new job. How'd you make it all work?
So the added layer to that is 2020 obviously was COVID, right? And so that, added some complexity. And, in Fairfax County, we were just like everyone else trying to figure out how to govern and lead the county through COVID and get access to vaccines for people and the basic needs support that they needed. So hugely challenging time. In terms of the family life, one of the kind of silver linings of it, and I'm probably not alone here, is fortunate that the work that I was doing at the time was, for the most part, became remote.
For sure.
So our board meetings, instead of me traveling to the government center and sitting there in our board auditorium for 14 hours, I was in the corner of my basement on those meetings. And the meetings that we were having with HOAs and civic associations were, for the most part, virtual. So that did allow me in that time period to probably spend more time with my family than I would have. Obviously, 2021, 2022, like everyone else, things started going back in person, and now it's pretty much fully in person. And the great thing for me about being on the Board of Supervisors is it's a full-time job, and it's very demanding, and I'm doing something most nights, right? I'm at a community event, I'm at a board meeting, I'm at a regional meeting, but because everything is more or less local, I could be home usually in the afternoon. I could try to be home from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. so I can maybe pick my son up from daycare or preschool and spend some time with him, maybe eat dinner with the family before I'm back going out to, a community meeting or event. So I always try to kind of carve out that afternoon time. Obviously, if I'm successful in this election in September, schedule will change, at least when the House is in session, but I just will have to be, disciplined about carving out that time.
Yeah, well, to that note, I think you're extremely blessed to be born where you were, because the commute from the personal or the district office to the congressional office isn't too bad, huh?
That's true. Although, obviously you don't have to fly back and forth. And, members who do that, who have families and young kids, that, I can't imagine how difficult that is. The flip side of it, and we went through this a lot with Connolly, is, members or folks on the Hill would be like, let's just have that, 8 a.m. meeting, in Longworth. And, for most members, that morning meeting means they're walking, from their Navy Yard apartment to the Hill. But when you're commuting in, and I live outside the Beltway, so like Don Byer has a very short commute.
Yeah, he's got the best seat, like let's get some redistricting going.
Yeah. But the outside the Beltway commute is a bit more challenging in the morning, but no complaints. The flying back and forth, for folks who have families and young kids, just very tough.
Absolutely. So what kind of made you decide to make that step to local politics, get off the Hill for a bit?
Yeah. So maybe, somewhat to Gerry Connolly's chagrin, I internalized 12 years of him telling me how great local government is. And, I think he would say, he did say many times, being chairman of the Fairfax County Board or even district supervisor were the best jobs that he had, because you can really, build very close relationships with the people and communities you represent. I was at these National Night Out events last night, and, it's neighborhood block parties that I've been going to for 5 years now. So you kind of can become part of the neighborhood,
for sure.
Which is a special kind of bond and relationship. And you can make tangible progress for people. So, I can get a stoplight in place sometimes. I can get a pothole filled. I can get a rec center renovated or new housing built, and you can, drive around and see the physical manifestation of that work. So it's very rewarding work in that way, in a way that, being in a legislature is a little bit different. In a legislature, maybe you can get a bill passed, but most days you're hoping that your efforts are moving the needle in the right direction, whichever direction you think is the right direction. So I was attracted to local government and the ability to kind of have that tangible impact on people. And the district that I live in was represented by a moderate Republican at the time. Good guy, but I had kind of a different take on things and different thoughts in terms of the things we should prioritize and the directions we should go as a county. So I decided to jump in the race. Nice. And was elected in 2019 and reelected in 2023. And one of the best experiences I had, probably for everyone, the first campaign is the one that you remember the most. And in that first campaign in 2019, I knocked on 15,000 doors. And a lot of times you see these articles and people talk about how many doors there was an obituary recently about a member of Congress, I can't remember the name, and the obituary said that in his first campaign he knocked on like 70,000 doors. And when you do the math on that is not possible.
Yeah, it doesn't add up.
But 15,000 I did that in about 10, 11 months is possible, but it means you go every day.
Yeah.
So every single day, every afternoon, I was out there for 3 or 4 hours at a time. Every Saturday, I started at 9 a.m., took a lunch break, and went till it got dark. Every Sunday, I started at 11 a.m., took a lunch break, went till it got dark. And it's a really powerful experience because, you get to hear directly from people about whatever their challenges are, right? And every neighborhood has a different set of challenges and concerns. And I think that helped me establish a strong bond with the people that I represent.
This is a silly question, but the logistics behind it really get me curious.
Yeah.
Like, did you have someone who was like planning out what you were going to do each day, or was that you? Or like, how do you make sure you don't miss something,
Yeah, so we, I had a great campaign manager and campaign team at the time, and we mapped out each precinct and have the software to do it, and decided the voters that we wanted to target. One of the things that we did that I think was particularly effective is that every person that I spoke to, right? So maybe I might if I knock on 4 doors, only one person's going to open the door, right? And the best is when they're in there, but they don't open the door.
For sure. That would be me.
Like I can see you, but you don't have to open it. But every person that I spoke to, we would send a follow-up note, right? And I would, whatever we talked about, I would write a handwritten, PS on that note. So if you and I, if you told me that there's a pothole on your street that, hasn't been filled, and, the Virginia Department of Transportation hasn't called you back, I would write that down. Thanks for letting me know about the pothole. I'm going to keep that in mind. Or, if you had a cute dog, I would say, it's great to meet you and Buster. And it kind of established that relationship.
For sure.
And then when I was sworn in, I had that list, like I had that spreadsheet of everything that thousands of people told me their little problems, and was able to go to work on them.
Very cool. So have you continued a similar strategy for a congressional election, or not as many door knockings these days?
Yeah, in running for Congress, you can't, we had a great, field staff and team and volunteers, who knocked on thousands and thousands of doors and continue to do it. As a candidate, you can't really, the district is too big. You can't really cover enough ground to make an impact. I do it, but now it's more to educate myself, right? Because you can read all the polls, you can take a guess at what people are thinking or how they're feeling. But when you go out and have 100 conversations with people at their door, you get a better feel for, what do they want from their congressional representative. So I do it now for that purpose more than, it's not going to have an appreciable impact. It's not going to have an appreciable impact on the outcome.
Do you see a difference in how people spoke to you or how people interacted in person in 2019 before COVID and then post-COVID?
Good question. Well, one very tangible thing is that post-COVID, with the rise of remote and hybrid work, like pre-COVID, if you were knocking on doors at 3:00 in the afternoon, not too many people would be home,
For
right?
sure.
Maybe retirees are home. Today, it's different, right? Because a lot of people are working from home, so you can talk to more people during the day. I would say in 2023, when I was running for re-election, interestingly, people maybe were more willing to engage when you're knocking on their door. Maybe like all of us, we were starved
we had a desire.
Yeah, it's like if you've been in your home on Zoom meetings all day and like someone's there willing to talk to you. You're interested in doing it.
You don't look too sketchy walking up
that's
to the
right.
door.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, that's interesting. So let's talk running for Congress. The genesis of that is Congressman Connolly's passing. Did you have inklings before that, or did that like kind of spark that idea of like, hey, maybe this is something I should continue on with?
Yeah, and it was a decision that I knew I would face at some point. I certainly hoped that point would be
for sure
much farther into the future. So it was a decision I knew I would face. It wasn't a decision that I had made, because I do love serving on the Board of Supervisors. I made the decision, Congressman Connolly announced that he wasn't going to seek re-election. He and I sat down and had some long conversations about it. He encouraged me to consider it, had conversations with my wife, and ultimately decided, especially because of the circumstances and the fact that it was, likely to be a special election, the challenges I feel we're facing as a nation right now in terms of, preserving our democracy and Constitution. I felt like I was probably the best prepared person to do it. So that led me to make the decision.
Yeah, and a pretty crowded primary too, where the Democratic primary is the most important to get your feet on the ground for the general. Obviously, your current job too has helped you be in a situation where you're not the stranger showing up to these events, but you're already ingrained in that community. How was the primary process?
So we had a 10-way primary, and I had lunch with one of the candidates earlier this week, and he was asking me if it played out the way I thought it would, and I said, I would not have been surprised if there were 6 to 8 candidates in the primary. I was a little surprised that we made it all the way to 10, but it was a very truncated process. And in Virginia, the governor, for congressional special elections, the governor sets the date, and the governor set the date for September 9th, which kind of put both parties in the position of having very truncated
Gotcha.
nominating processes. So it was a sprint, and there were great candidates, 2 other elected officials, other folks with fascinating backgrounds and accomplishments. I think obviously our advantages were I had a strong base of support in the district that I represent. It's 130,000 people, right in the middle of the 11th Congressional District, and then the Connolly connection across the rest of the district. And I've spent my adult life working with Democrats across Fairfax and across Northern Virginia. So it was a lot of, of the 38,000 people who came out and voted, I probably personally met 10,000 of them over the years. They're in my district, or, they called Congressman Connolly's office for help, or, their kids interned for us, or we had some kind of connection or relationship, and I think that helped us.
So you're obviously familiar with the campaign process at this point. First, quick question. Mm-hmm. Was it nice to have a truncated process of to just get it over with?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. It obviously, and I think that may be one of the reasons that there were 10 candidates. Typically the decision to run for Congress is a decision to give up, 12 months or 18 months of your life. And that's hard for a lot of people, to make work with their professional or family commitments. When you're talking about a race that, is 2 months, I think a lot of people say, well, I can pull it off for 2 months. So yeah, all things just on a personal level, sprinting through it is better than a 18-month grind. But at the same token, I've been in those long races and campaigns before, and you can build connections in a longer campaign like that are harder to do in a short one.
And I'm sure that was so valuable to the point of where you're already working to make that process easier, to have the name ID. So you've worked on a lot of campaigns, and the second part of the question is, what's the difference now being the principal? You're the name on the board. What was the most surprising thing of that, or what's completely different being on this side of the campaign?
Yeah, I think I was leaving an event the other day, and someone said, isn't it nice that you have staff, staffers helping you now, and you're no longer the staffer, which is true. I'm fortunate to have great folks helping me, but It is a lot easier to be the staffer in the back of the room, watching and thinking of the critique of because that was I would be in the back of the room, right, watching, Connolly, and he was brilliant, obviously, but I always had my thoughts on, you could have said this, or you could have said that, or what about this or that. So it's easier to be in the back of the room criticizing than to be, the person standing up there having to do it on the fly.
For sure.
When the pressure is on you. So, that's an adaptation that I, kind of made over time on the Board of Supervisors. I would say a challenge in the transition is the psychological and emotional burden is larger, right? So, we're dealing with tough issues that impact people's lives on the Board of Supervisors in my current role, and obviously in Congress. And those decisions weigh heavily on everyone, even as a staff member. Yeah. But it's a different level of psychological and emotional burden when you're the one who's got to make that final decision. For sure. Right? And you stay up a little bit later at night thinking about it and agonizing over it. And that's an adjustment too.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so as we hit the final stretch before the special election, how is the special election different than the regular election every 2 years? How quickly are you taking office after you win? Is it next day, or?
Historically, members elected to the House in special elections have been sworn in quickly. I think there have been in this Congress 2 special elections, both in Republican districts, won by Republicans, and they were sworn in within days, I think perhaps the next day. So, I'm hopeful that it will be as soon as possible, the day after the election or shortly thereafter. The speaker makes that decision. So there's a process with the Virginia election authorities and the clerk of the House, and then the speaker will schedule it. But I anticipate that it will be pretty quick.
So that, I feel like, also is another benefit to you. You've been there before. You're not coming into this brand new circumstance. You know what to expect. So have you envisioned what your role as a new member is going to look like, whether it's setting up an office and creating that culture inside your office, or you're a former staffer, you're going to feel inclined to kind of control that world a little bit more than someone coming in who doesn't have that experience?
Yeah, and I will have to wrestle with that, and I've wrestled with that in my role on the Board of Supervisors, and I have a staff. Fairfax is different than a lot of local governments. I have a staff of 7 people that work for me now, and I have to remind myself that I'm the supervisor in that office, not the chief of staff. I have a great chief of staff there. So my job is to set the tone, to set the standards, and the chief of staff's job is to implement those things and make sure that they're enforced regularly. So I will have to discipline myself to do that. Definitely. My job as a candidate or as a member is to be out there, engaging with the people that I represent. That's my job.
So speaking to discipline, what routines have you been able to put in place that kind of ground you, that set you up for success with a very busy life, right? Running for Congress, you're representing 1 million people, you've got a family at home. How do you make all that work?
So I'm pretty routine driven. I'm an early riser, so I'm up at 4:30 or 5 a.m. I try to work out every day. So my routine is to work out every day. It means I make it 5 or 6 days a week. So I try to do that every day. Do my newspaper reading in the morning, all ideally before my son wakes up, because once he wakes up, it's game on, boom, nothing productive is going to happen at that point.
I cherish the 5 to 8 a.m.
Yeah, that's right.
So much.
You have to take advantage of those moments. And then I try, I'm working all day, and I try to carve out a couple hours in the afternoon to spend time with my family. And that routine has worked pretty well for us. It obviously, my wife deserves an incredible amount of credit, for tolerating and supporting me in this lifestyle. But we made it work, and it'll be an adjustment if we win the election in the fall. But we'll figure that out.
Absolutely. So before we go, is there anything else you want to put on people's radar that you want someone to know about you?
What do I want someone to know about me? I think we've covered a lot. I think one of the things that I was very conscious to do, and am to this day, when I was chief of staff, and now, young staffers or would-be staffers, folks who were trying to get on the Hill, would come and kind of ask me for career advice or help. I took every one of those meetings.
Appreciate that.
And hopefully there's not someone out there that I missed, but I'm pretty sure I took if I missed you, send me an email. I will meet with you and try to help. But I just think, it's important. And by the way, Democrats, and mostly Democrats who came to me, but some Republicans too, who were looking for advice and career advice. And I always tried to be as generous as I could in doing that, because, folks did that for me. So I recommend that to anyone, wherever you are in your career, to, reach back and help other folks. And I know you all are doing that through the podcast and your other work. So that's really important. And, the kind of advice that I always give people is, focus on the basics. Like, if you show up on time every day, if you respond to every email and voicemail that you get, and if you accomplish, the tasks that, your boss has asked you to accomplish, you're going to be in the top 90%. You're in the top 90% if you do those things consistently. Sure. And if you happen to be, brilliant or a great writer or a great strategist, you're in the top 1%.
Yeah.
So, focusing on those basics, I read, there was a book, a biography of James Baker that I read once, who was, chief of staff and secretary of state and kind of a Washington legend, a different era. But, he was famous for, he wouldn't leave the office until he returned every phone call. Now, it might be harder for him today because it would be like phone calls, text, Slack,
it's so hard.
Signal, DMs, and all that. But I do think that just responsiveness is really important, and you can build a reputation for yourself. I mean, there are elected officials who endorsed me in this election because I've been returning their phone calls for 20 years.
Yeah.
And over that time, we built up trust. Now, it wasn't every time I returned their phone call and said yes to whatever their request was, right? But they knew that if they called me, if they needed something from Congressman Connolly, needed our support for something, that I would respond to them and give them the courtesy of response. And that's like oddly rare.
For sure.
So that is my biggest piece of advice, is just develop a reputation for being responsible.
No, I think that's really nice to hear. And I've been building this business for 3.5 years now, and some days where it's like, does this make any difference, or like, is the reach out I'm doing ever going to accomplish something, or like how I treat people well? It's like, so it is that like building effect over time of like, I'm going to look back in 10, 15 years when the business has achieved what I've hoped it would achieve, and see all those little things I was doing back then as like, I was setting myself up to like create a good system. And so it's great advice. Thank you. Well, last question, the hardest hitting question: Starbucks or Dunkin as the coffee shop in Longworth?
Neither.
What should it be?
And this is a Gerry Connolly influence on me too. Starbucks to me tastes like it's burnt.
Yep, for sure.
Dunkin to me
Nick, who used to work at Starbucks, is shaking his head. Yes.
Dunkin to me tastes like it's watered down.
Absolutely.
I will go to my grave. I am a 7-Eleven coffee guy.
All right.
7-Eleven has great coffee. It's still inexpensive. You can take your reusable mug in there, and they'll refill it for a lower price. Nice. It's all across Northern Virginia. You can always find one. If I try to make my coffee at home, but if I need it and I'm out, 7-Eleven all the way.
What a funny environment that would be to have like just a 7-Eleven pop up in Longworth. There
should be one. That'll be my first bill.
I think
get the 7-Eleven in there.
Well, already thinking about the big ideas. We appreciate you being on here, James. Thanks for taking the time.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning into Capital Spotlight Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe to our channels to stay updated on new releases, share the show with your friends, and rate the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. For more from Connect, subscribe to our daily newsletters, follow us on social media, and check out our website, all at Capital Connect, capital with an O, CNCT. See you next time.